A few weeks ago, I thought it would be fun to do a Q&A video, so I posted here on YouTube and on social media, inviting all of you to submit questions. The theme was anything you've ever wanted to ask a high priest. I even made an anonymous web form where people could ask a question without having their name attached to it. After the first day or so, I hadn't gotten any sort of response, and honestly, I was kind of thinking I was going to have to cancel the project altogether. But then, they started flowing in. Some of these questions are simple and straightforward, but others made me think for hours. You guys asked about the mysteries, about coven dynamics. There's a lot of really interesting topics here. A quick shout out to my Patreon supporters, Tempest and Sarah, who help make videos like this possible. And without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Aerik Arkadian, and today I'm answering your questions. Before I get too far into this, I just want to point out that while I am a high priest, I do not speak authoritatively for the craft, for Wicca, or even for my tradition, because no one in their right mind tries to do that. I can only speak authoritatively for myself. As such, you're about to hear a lot of my opinions, interpretations, and personal stories. If there's something you don't like, I kindly invite you to please feel free to disagree. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to some answers. What tradition are you from / did you achieve your degrees in? Hey, that's an easy one to start out with. I'm a 3rd degree Gardnerian high priest, so I trained with the Gardnerian coven to receive my degrees. And also the coven that I run today with Celine is Gardnerian. What is the difference between a high priest and high priestess besides gender? Would you say there's an expectation of the role that differs from that of a high priestess? Is it getting hot in here? This is a very controversial topic for some people. I'll give you my opinion. The simple answer is none. Every person, regardless of gender, is a union of divine masculine and divine feminine energy, which means that everyone can channel or personify the god or goddess energy. Now, in terms of jobs we perform in circle, we do divvy them up. Sometimes that's based on convenience, but politics within a tradition can unfortunately influence that as well. I will say that the goal in our coven is balance. Can you teach us some male mysteries? No. We can talk about it though. As I start this answer, just a friendly reminder that this is all based on my personal opinion, so again, please feel free to disagree. First of all, what is a mystery? I think a pretty good definition of that is experiential wisdom, which means it's something that can't be taught, it has to be experienced. Okay, so let me try to frame this picture for a moment. You're asking about men's mysteries, and as much as I personally don't like to think of spiritual mysteries belonging solely to either men or women, we can at least start the conversation there. Which begs the question, what are women's mysteries? Now, I am not trying to label or reduce anyone, but historically and in tribal civilizations, this was often looked at from a purely physical, biological perspective of childbirth, menstruation, and lactation. I can't experience those as a man, so I won't talk about them any further. And you might be saying men don't have any biological equivalent, and you're right, which is why tribal groups usually had some sort of rites of passage, like experiencing the first hunt to enter into manhood. We don't really hunt anymore in modern society, and we've pretty much done away with rites of passage almost altogether. So there's a gap here that could be replaced by something as simple as a respected male figure shaking your hand and saying, "As a man, I accept you, we're in this together." But let's think of this from less of a biological perspective and more of a spiritual one, where we're dealing with the archetypal sacred feminine and sacred masculine energies. And actually, there's a third archetype, the sacred offspring. It's best to look at these as parts of a whole, so we'll consider each one as it fits neatly into a thesis, antithesis, synthesis triangle. Try saying that 3 times fast. From the Divine Mother, we learn the mystery of birth, or rather the mystery of life. This is the thesis, the beginning of our journey. From the Divine Father, we learn the mystery of death. Now, obviously, we can't experience a physical death and then talk about it, but we can certainly have a symbolic one, or death of the ego, a common theme that is seen throughout a variety of different mystery traditions. Death is the opposite of life, the antithesis. What do mom and dad do? They make a baby. And the mystery we learn from this divine child is that of rebirth into unity and newness, something that is neither the mother nor the father. The child is the synthesis of 2 opposing ideas, the top point in our triangle. Obviously, these are spiritual milestones that anyone can achieve regardless of gender. If you'd like to take an approach based on the tree of life, then you have the pillar of force headed by Chokmah, the archetypal masculine, and you have the pillar of form headed by Binah, the archetypal feminine. And of course, between them, you have the middle pillar. Now, each one of these pillars and basically every point on the tree of life represents its own set of mysteries, which would be an entire book of information. If you're interested in that, maybe pick up a copy of The Chicken Kabbalah by Lon Milo Duquette, Kabbalah for Wiccans by Jack Chanek, or The Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune. Better yet, read all 3. If you'd like to glean some mysteries purely from the god, then let's consider his journey around the wheel of the year. Around spring equinox, the god is young. He's the hunter. You might even say horny teenager or sower of seed. The next phase is at summer solstice, adulthood, king, someone who has accepted being the protector of the land and the people in the land. By autumn equinox, the god energy is sacrificial. He's ready to die because death is what is required for the cycle to continue again. And finally, at winter solstice, the god is reborn and the whole process repeats itself. In this example, one of the primary mysteries portrayed is that of death and resurrection, as we see exemplified in god forms like Osiris or, dare I say it, even Jesus Christ. In turn, this connects back to the wild hunt rite of passage. In a hunt, you have the hunter, the person doing the hunting, and the prey, the thing that is being hunted, the thing that dies. The god is both hunter and prey, simultaneously the one doing the hunting and the one who dies. And so here we have the mystery of duality. I think we could go on and on about this for hours, but this is a pretty good start. Where can I find recipes that involve ways to make medicinal herbs, teas, and even bake or cook with? If you're looking for a general herbal guide, Scott Cunningham wrote the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs, which is like a classic. He also wrote the complete book of incense, oils, and brews, which includes lots of recipes with practical applications like soaps, incense, inks, oils, etc. I don't spend a lot of time baking or cooking, and when I do, I usually just try to find a recipe online, but I have flipped through a few witchy cookbooks at the bookstore, and they all seem pretty similar. Scott Cunningham, again, also wrote a book called Wicca in the Kitchen, which has some recipes in it that you could try out. But in general, I'm really just not the best person to ask about this sort of thing. What is the difference between a priest and a high priest? What would you say are the definition or expectation differences? The difference is one of degree, at least within our tradition. When you are initiated, you become a priest or priestess. And that is not something to take lightly, and that's why we take initiation so seriously. The expectation at this level is that you're present, learning, and willing to take on small jobs that get assigned to you. A high priest or high priestess, on the other hand, is someone who's ready to lead a coven of their own. In our line, this happens at 3rd degree. The expectation at this level is that you really know and understand ritual, you can teach classes on the fly, and are capable of performing any and all jobs within Circle. Not everyone needs to be a high priest or high priestess. There's nothing wrong with just being a priest. Getting your 2nd or 3rd degree doesn't give you any bonus points in the afterlife. It's really just about the role you want to play in serving the craft during this lifetime. What's the best place to find a Wiccan coven? I bought a few books and I'm interested in learning more. The only real source of general coven listings that I'm aware of at the moment is a website called mandragoramagica.com. It has listings for several groups in multiple countries, and it isn't limited by any one particular tradition, so you'll be able to get a good sense in what groups are around you. Now, there are also seekers groups on Facebook. If you already know what tradition you're interested in, you can maybe go to Gardnerian Seekers or Alexandrian Seekers as Facebook groups and search within there. Usually they have listings of local covens. If you're not seeing one in your area, you could always make a post or message an admin and ask for more information. Is book study critical to elevating, or is classwork and hands-on practice enough to train a high priest? Independent study is an important element not only to achieving your degrees, but also just to steady spiritual growth in general. Just so we're all on the same page, our coven assigns homework and reading. Those assignments and whatever classwork we do are meant to lay a foundation and inspire your own personal study of whatever sticks out and calls to you. What's the weirdest thing you've ever had a spiritual teacher or mentor ask you to do? I think practicing Skyclad was one of the weirdest and most uncomfortable things that I had to do. I knew full well what I was getting into, and I had actually done some of my solitary practice Skyclad, but I was completely unprepared for the reality of the experience of being naked in a group of other naked people. But now it feels so comfortable and natural that I wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes it actually feels weird now to practice with clothes on. What is your lineage to Gardner? Our particular coven can trace its lineage back through the Long Island line. I wouldn't say it is particularly oath-bound to tell you more than that, but we like to keep it that way. We tell our initiates their full lineage on the day of their initiation. What gatherings do you attend? In terms of festivals, we usually go to things like Phoenix festivals, Summer Magick, Turning the Tide, and Florida Pagan Gathering, usually things that are within the South Florida area. For regular rituals, we do Espits and Sabbats. We try to line things up with the full moon, but sometimes it ends up being a new moon ritual. Sabbats for us are usually open. Sometimes we do a coven family ritual where several covens within the area will all meet up. Sometimes we do a wider community-based ritual. Since we have lots of coven family in the area, sometimes that means we'll attend more than one ritual per Sabbat. There's one year that I lovingly refer to as the year of 3 Mabons, where we celebrated autumn equinox 3 times. The schedule can get pretty busy. What is the role of the masculine in modern-day Wicca, considering much of it is focused on the sacred feminine? I guess that depends on who you ask, but since you're asking me, I think Wicca is about balance and unity of two opposing polarities. Now, you can't have that balance if you're focusing solely on one. And a lot of that imbalance comes from bias on the part of teachers or coven leaders, and not from core elements of Wicca itself. In our coven, at least, we're looking for that balance and equality. And I feel that I'm really lucky that our coven's high priestess, who also just happens to be my wife and magical partner, shares this ideal. You can't ignore the god any more than you can ignore the goddess. Ultimately, the role of the masculine is the same as that of the feminine. They are both there to balance each other. I'm sorry, I'm still new. What do you believe happens to us when we die? I get anxiety for myself and my family members. First of all, please don't ever apologize for being new. We all started somewhere. Nobody began their journey on the craft knowing everything. For me personally, I believe we are reincarnated through a series of lifetimes before ultimately returning to the all, or source, or deity, or oneness, or whatever you want to call that sort of thing. What inspired you to work towards being a high priest? Believe it or not, my childhood dream was to be a Christian preacher. My parents would be so disappointed. After I started earnestly seeking the craft and was initiated into a coven, I began feeling a lack of male presence. And that's not because the craft is fundamentally unbalanced. It's because I was often the only dude in ritual. And a lot of times I was just the acting priest by default. In hindsight, I feel like the universe was preparing me. I know I probably got a lot more hands-on experience than a lot of people are able to get. Today, I'm very grateful for that. But at the time, it was a little upsetting, and I was not always shy about expressing my discontentment with the situation. I used to basically beg any high priest that I could find, please, come ritual with us. Please come do circle. Let me learn from you. But those experiences were few and far between. There was always a void, and eventually I felt like I was being called to fill it myself. So here I am. How can I be more in tune with myself, intuition, and nature? For getting in tune with yourself, definitely practice meditation daily. Spend some time with each of the 4 elements and try to determine how they're balanced within you. Which ones have traits that come out more often than others? Which ones need adjusting? Next, I think divination is a great way to hone your intuition. Grab a tarot deck or any other divinatory tool and work with it every day. Give yourself a quick 3-card reading in the morning to predict how your day is going to go. And when you get more comfortable with that, start asking friends or other people you know if you can give them a quick reading for free. Every time you do any sort of psychic work like this, it strengthens and flexes those muscles of intuition. Finally, if you want to get more in touch with nature, you need to spend some time in nature. Go on nature walks, stand barefoot in the grass, try growing plants from seed, and talk to them while you're watering them. They might even start talking back to you at some point. Find the tallest tree near you. Meditate with it, touch it, get a sense of its energy. Visualize yourself becoming a tree. What does it feel like to be a tree? What sort of thoughts does a tree think? What sort of hopes or fears does a tree have? All of this might sound incredibly ridiculous, but it can put you on an entirely different vibratory wavelength. What is your favorite subject to study? Music. I mean, music! For a long time, I used to treat my music like a totally separate entity from my spirituality. But there's all these things I experienced as a musician that I began using as sort of benchmarks for other things that I experienced in ritual. For instance, the coven operating successfully as a group mind is a lot like a band improvising together. And raising energy as a group, as a coven, feels a lot like raising energy in a crowd during a performance. I eventually realized that music and spirituality are just two sides of the same coin. There's all these musical mysteries too, like the divine monochord, the music of the spheres, sympathetic resonance, and the law of octaves. And these are things that I'd really like to delve deeply into and expand on in the future in more videos. Whose teachings do you hope to emulate in your practice? Whose teachings or writings do you find the most inspirational for your practice? Well, that's going to be hard to narrow down. While I respect the writings from the forerunners of the craft in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, I personally don't always find them to be particularly inspiring. I find that I draw a lot from older sources like Franz Bardon or even as far back as Agrippa. If we're talking about modern authors that I've had the pleasure of meeting, then a few stand out. The sarcastic wit of Jason Mankey, or the calm and well-informed demeanor of Ivo Dominguez Jr. As far as emulation goes, that's a lot like music, right? Now, I jokingly say that if I could sound like any band ever, I would make my music sound like Muse. But sometimes I play something, say something, or teach something, and I know it didn't come from me, and it doesn't feel right. The person I want to most emulate in my practice or in my music is me. And that's not a statement of ego. That is just about being true to myself. Who is your favorite Wiccan celebrity alive today? I don't know. Does Stevie Nicks count? She's pretty cool. There's lots of well-known witchy authors today that the community has celebritized. As an example, again, Ivo Dominguez Jr., I absolutely and totally fangirled when I first met him at one of his workshops, and then he sat down and had lunch with all of us. A while after that, he agreed to be the first guest on my show. Most of these people are very down to earth and accessible. It's very refreshing. What does a regular day of devotional work look like for you, if any? For a good long while, devotional work was not a part of my life at all. I think it was PTSD from Christianity, where it was like you have to read your Bible and pray every day to grow spiritually. And I didn't want my craft practice to feel like that. I have my patron deities, and I do things regularly that honor them and that I feel tap into their particular current of energy. When I play music, for instance, it honors Pan and Apollo. When I write, it honors Thoth. They're not needy, but if they want something, they let me know and I do it. Sometimes this manifests as making a particular incense blend. Sometimes it manifests as playing a particular song. Sometimes it's inspiration for a particular project or video or music. Sometimes it just means saying hello and bringing them into ritual. And occasionally I will give them some sort of offering too. So that's like the Wiccan side of it for me. But most of my actual devotional work today comes from things that I learned through Lukumi, like talking to the dead or honoring the Orisha on certain days. There are things that I do every day now, like working with our ancestor altar, And there are things that I do once a week, like leaving out offerings of rum and cigars. What attracted you to this path? What attracted you to the tradition you're involved in particular? Okay, I think it all started with rocks. Now, as a kid, I had this weird fascination with rocks. I used to go out into the backyard almost every day, and I would just dig in the dirt and see what rocks I could unearth. And I mean, just like regular rocks. Whatever I found, I brought inside, and I kept in this big orange and brown cardboard shoebox. Anyway, that kind of stuck with me forever, and later in life, I decided I wanted to decorate my room with crystals. I went to a local shop, and I bought a couple of quartz formations right off their shelf that I thought were visually appealing. When I got back to my car, I unwrapped the packaging. I wanted to see what I had just bought, and when I held them in my hand, I felt their energy. I couldn't explain that, and certainly nothing I had ever learned in Christianity gave me an explanation for that either. I was kind of flip-flopping at the time, back and forth between atheism and agnosticism, but I wanted to learn more about this energy and experiment with it. I started hanging out at metaphysical bookstores. I got my Reiki certification. I started practicing meditation, even studied tarot. Basically anything I could get my hands on and learn with the label of New Age. The deeper I got, everything seemed to keep pointing me in the direction of Wicca and witchcraft, but that made me extremely uncomfortable. The Bible is very clear on what to do with witches. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" is an often quoted phrase. I was still going against almost 2 decades of Christian programming. I was comfortable with the New Age stuff because I told myself a lot of it was based on Eastern philosophies or even new theories in science like quantum mechanics or string theory. Basically, it was not expressly witchcraft, that unforgivable sin that would condemn me to an eternity of suffering in hell. After all, what if I was wrong? What if Christianity was right? And that was a haunting whisper in my head that would persist for many years. I really had to sit around and work out what I truly believe, what resonated with me, and what felt true. Wicca seemed like an overall cosmology that connected all of the big dots for me, the elements, God and goddess energy, and reincarnation. So I bought a copy of Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham, and I started to practice in secret. But I eventually hit a wall. I tried searching on the internet for more guidance, but there were too many contrasting opinions and too many opposing voices, and I just wasn't sure which way to go with things. I didn't know what to do or what not to do, and I felt very stuck in my spiritual growth. Now enter a spiral of depression, poor judgment, bad decisions, and drug addiction that lasted for years, the end result of which was my permanent relocation to Florida. After I got here, I had a series of spiritual experiences and revelations. The universe literally spoke to me. I decided that if I was going to be serious about my spiritual growth, I needed to find a coven to study with. I needed that structured learning experience. I remember actually Googling the phrase, "covens near me." At that time, Witchvox, which was a website for coven listings, was still in existence. So I found a couple listings for covens in the area. This was the first time I had actually considered traditions like Gardnerian and Alexandrian. Out of everything I could find at the time, Gardnerian seemed a little bit more legit to me. I really wanted that structure and lineage, so I decided to send them a message. And then I just sort of sat back and gave it up to the universe. Several months later, I had honestly kind of forgotten about it, but I got a very interesting email message with the subject line, "The coven has been waiting for you." And that was the start of this particular leg of my spiritual journey. I'm 67 now, and despite extensive low-level reading and a few courses, I didn't act on a referral to a local coven because of my age. What are your thoughts? Well, I'm not 100% sure if you're saying that you chose not to join a coven or if you're saying that you weren't asked to join a coven. But I will say that all covens should be autonomous entities. Each one might operate with significant differences. One particular group of people might not feel right to you, but another might feel like home. It just depends on the people. I can't really say more. If you could give any piece of advice for someone interested in the role of spiritual leadership, what would it be? Yeah, just make sure your heart is in the right place. Don't do it for personal gain. Do it because you want to serve the craft. You will most likely invest a significant amount of time into people. But people are people, and some of them will hurt you. Some of them will even make you say things like, why am I doing this at all? But other people will fill your heart with love and make you extremely proud. Be ready for both extremes and understand that it's all part of the experience of being in a spiritual leadership position. Also, something I occasionally have to remind myself of, you can't force anyone to do anything. And that includes your students. They have to want it. What are some tips, do's, and don'ts you'd give to beginners? One of the biggest lessons in Magick I actually learned as a child from Ms. Frizzle on the Magick school bus. Take chances, make mistakes,
and get messy.
Don't ever stop reading, don't ever stop learning, but also don't ever be afraid to just do things. A lot of magic is learned by doing. You can read about a ritual all you want, but you develop a much different perspective when you actually perform it. And this is the difference between knowing and understanding. Also, you might do things wrong, and that's totally okay. Mistakes are part of the learning process. Nobody is perfect. Everyone messes up. But that fear of doing things wrong can sometimes hold us back from experiences that are important for our overall growth. What would you say is your greatest weakness, your greatest strength? What is this, a job interview? I'll answer this in terms of the elements. I'm good with fire. As an Aries, I have a lot of those tendencies. The one that I am worst with, the thing that scares me the most usually, is water. So do I get the job? What do you consider an underrated material like a plant, rock, etc.? Interesting question. Remember my childhood obsession? I'd have to say stones. Just regular rocks that you can find outside in the dirt, but smooth river stones are usually the best. Everybody's always into crystals, but I've made a ton of talismans using regular rocks. With a Dremel tool or even with a paint pen, you can carve or decorate with sacred symbols to empower them. We sometimes do house blessings by having the entire coven come over and hide trinkets around someone's home. I frequently use river rocks for this purpose, and I think they work fantastically. What is your coven's process by which to vet new seekers? We exchange emails, we ask questions. If that works out, then we move on to a phone call and ask more questions. From there, my wife and I will meet face-to-face with the seeker for coffee or something in a neutral location and ask lots more questions. If all of the initial meetings go well, then we invite them to attend one of our classes or public rituals and kind of get a feel for the group. At that point, it starts to become more of a coven process, and everybody needs to be able to play well with each other. What is your coven's process by which to remove destructive members? Luckily, we haven't had to do anything like that yet. I have watched some other covens around me deal with something like that, but I would prefer not to speak to their experience. I will say that destructive people in the craft do tend to weed themselves out, especially when they see that a group is serious and assigns things like homework. I know that doesn't stop everyone, but that's also why our vetting process has so many steps to it. Did your coven choose to file as a religious nonprofit or a different legal structure? No, but that is a very wise decision. We've been toying with the idea of a nonprofit for the past year or so. It's a complicated process, but also running a coven can be a very expensive thing, and that's not something that you ever truly understand until you have one of your own. How does your coven maintain community spaces and finances? Community space is mostly just our house. As for finances, we don't charge for anything that we do within the coven. Some groups have coven dues or required donations, but our tradition specifically says not to do that. My wife and I consider this a way of giving back to the craft, which has given us so much. For our outer court folks, we really only ever ask them to bring food or drink to share after ritual for our feast. Financial limitations should never be an obstacle in spiritual growth. Occasionally, there is a guest speaker or teacher we want to bring in, and if that is the case, then we decide as a group and split up the costs together. All that said, and while we will probably never make it an express requirement, we do hope to see our initiates help in shouldering that load. And to be honest, we have. 2 of our coveners recently donated a Zoom subscription to help us out with distance rituals. Also, when we see someone say, I want to run ritual, and they plan it, bring all the supplies, and lead everyone, that helps tremendously, and all this makes us extremely proud. What books would you recommend to learn more about witchcraft and spells? I have tons of books that I talk about or list on my website, but I'm usually not the biggest fan of spell books. That being said, a lot of people will recommend The Complete Book of Spells by Deborah Lipp or The Witch's Book of Spellcraft by Jason Mankey. I think it's usually better to write your own spells and spend more time developing how you personally work with energy, your visualization technique, your meditation practice, etc., etc. These are all very fundamental. For learning about witchcraft, Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, which we lovingly refer to as Uncle Bucky's Big Blue Book, is still a pretty good start, although we don't necessarily agree with everything that's in there. You can also check out the Paranormal series on Kindle. Look for the one with the Ferrars books. You'll find things like Witch's Bible, spells and how they work, and what witches do. It's cheaper than buying the paperbacks, which are sometimes really hard to find anyway. Finally, if you're looking for a very structured approach to high magic, you can check out Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig. What are some good ways to continue to grow in witchcraft? Actually, I have 2 tips that I would like to share. The first is something that I learned in my musical career, but yes, it applies to witchcraft too. When I was in high school, I was taking guitar lessons from this guy named Doug. But Doug also taught me some life lessons, the most important of which was the value of structured practice. He told me to take an hour each day, 15 minutes practicing music theory, 15 minutes practicing my scales, 15 minutes learning a homework piece of music, and then 15 minutes doing something fun, like trying to play a rock song that I liked or something that was way beyond my playing abilities. In a few months of doing this, I shot ahead of other guitarists who had been playing for years. With structured practice for witchcraft, it's pretty much the same concept. It doesn't have to be an hour each day, but let's say you have 30 minutes. 5 minutes meditating, 5 minutes practicing a form of divination, 10 minutes reading a book that challenges you, and 10 minutes reading something you just enjoy. Like my blog, right? It's very important that you make this a daily routine. You can obviously customize your practice plan. Maybe you have 2 hours every day. Maybe you only have 15 minutes. The key concept here is regularly spending small, focused amounts of time on a variety of different topics rather than just rabbit holing into something every once in a while for several hours. The second tip is to just realize and accept that sometimes you're gonna hit spiritual plateaus. This is natural and it's part of the learning process. But when it happens, in my opinion, you basically have 2 different options for how you're gonna handle it. You can go back to the beginning and review material, reread books that you've already read. If you're reading the right stuff, hopefully it challenged you the first time, so the second time through will show you something new. I have some books that I've read 4 or 5 times, and I'm still getting new information. You'll also see on my website, I will sometimes write articles on basic topics, like things we might go over in our Wicca 101 classes. And when I do that, I try to dive in as deeply as possible, and I learn a lot in the process. The other thing you can do to try to push through that spiritual plateau is to throw something entirely new into the routine. Don't necessarily stop your routine altogether, just add something new that you haven't tried before. Okay, this is what that might look like. Let's say you've hit a plateau with divination. You've been working with tarot for a few months, doing daily readings for yourself, but you don't feel like you're making steady progress anymore. You might go back and reread your tarot books. Hopefully you read challenging ones the first time, or you could change it up. Try something new. Try automatic writing. Try reading the runes. Try working with a pendulum. Try tea leaf reading. These are different forms of divination, different skills, but they all flex and strengthen the same muscles of intuition. Once you return to tarot again, you might notice that you're seeing things in a totally different light. What are some good ways to learn about the history of it all? If you're looking for a book on the history of traditional witchcraft, I think The Triumph of the Moon by Ronald Hutton is hands down the best resource. It's a fairly long book. It is not always an easy read, but it's got more information in there that you could ever hope to want. For something that's a little bit more digestible, Professor Hutton also has a YouTube documentary called A Very British Witchcraft, which goes over most of the highlights. What are some good beginner plants or herbs I can start off with, like to grow myself and use in medicine, teas, or spells, or books to read about this? There are a lot of basic kitchen herbs that are pretty easy to grow. Basil doesn't take up too much space and can make a home on basically any windowsill that gets direct sunlight. You can also find baby basil plants in pretty much any grocery store. Use the leaves to spice up your cooking, or use it in a salad, or use it in your spell work for its fiery elemental energy. Mint is very resilient and has several uses. Chamomile is good to grow for teas. If you have the space, rosemary or oregano can grow into fragrant, woody bushes. Here's what I would recommend if you really want to give it a go. Go to your local garden center or hardware store or wherever else they sell packets of seeds. Pick 5 or 6 plants that stick out to you, and then spend a few weeks and see if you can get those seeds to sprout. I've killed many innocent plants this way, but I've also been successful with several, and it's given me a much deeper understanding of magical herbs. How do you feel about the community's expectations of male witches, and who do they have to look up to other than emulating the gods? Wow, really asking some difficult questions here. I'm not sure if I can accurately crystallize the community's opinions, but I can sort of walk you through my personal experience with the word witch itself, because when I first started practicing and walking this path, I didn't really identify with the term. I wasn't sure what to call myself. There is a classic example, even in some of Gerald Gardner's early works of fiction, of the synergy between the witch, who is a female, and the magician, who is a male. You might even see this in the tarot's major arcana. The counterpart to the magician is the high priestess, right? We tend to assign gender to certain words. Add on to that the fact that mainstream media for years has portrayed witches as mainly older and ugly women, and you have some understandably very confused people like me. I now view the word witch as a fairly broad term. It doesn't denote age, race, gender, or even tradition. I fully identify with the word, and to me, it really just means you're someone who does magic in one form or another. Or to put it more eloquently, anyone who does any sort of woo-woo. And if you want to know where that came from, you can watch Music, Myth, and Magic, Episode 1. Now, the community's expectation of male witches is definitely going to depend on which traditions are present. You'll probably get a different answer if you ask a Dianic witch or a Minoan witch or an Alexandrian witch. Some people might tell you that men hold all the power, and some people might tell you that men are an unnecessary accessory, like a scarf on a bright summer's day. I know in some British traditional witchcraft groups, things can get very female-centric, very goddess-oriented, and hey, you'll sometimes see this manifest by lower numbers of men who attend rituals in certain areas or with certain covens, or maybe, as I experienced, a coven that has no dedicated high priest. As a community, we've even come up with a system to address this. It's called the rent-a-priest. It's when you're planning a big ritual like an initiation or an elevation, but you don't have a high priest of your own, so you borrow one from a coven that does. Having a rent-a-priestess is totally possible too, but in our area and our tradition, you'll see it is much more common to find a coven that is led solely by a high priestess. I don't feel it's always of high importance to base things off of what other people think. I think the more important thing is what you do. So to that end, go out there and defy other people's expectations or exceed other people's expectations. Be an active part of the community and give back to the craft in the best way that you can. If we can all do that for a little while, maybe we can be a little less concerned with something as trivial as gender roles. The second half of this question asks, who do men have to look up to or emulate other than the gods? Trying to emulate the gods is noble, but ultimately impossible. Now, at times and during certain rites or rituals, you could say that the high priestess is acting as a representation of the goddess, or that the high priest is acting as a representation of the god. But that only lasts for the duration of the ritual. Outside of circle, everybody is just a person. The gods aren't always fair standards to judge ourselves by, which is why I think it's important to have real human people in our lives that we can look up to. Specifically, I feel it's important that men have access to other men and women have access to other women to learn from. You know, if they want. All right, this is getting to be a long answer, but now it's personal story time for me. I've already made mention of the fact that when I was being trained, there was a lack of male presence. I was often the only guy in a ritual, and our coven did not have a dedicated high priest. This led me to ask one question over and over again. Am I doing it right? There is a lot to be learned by reading, there is a lot to be learned by instruction, and there is a lot to be learned by doing. But experiencing someone's energy when they lead ritual can't be taught. Several years ago, when Celine and I were first-degree initiates, we were invited to a small gathering. It was a group of covens within our coven family. It was meant to be a weekend of learning and building relationships, but I was focused on one key aspect. I knew there would be high priests there, and I knew a group ritual was usually held. By this time, I had been initiated and performing the duties of a priest for at least a year without ever really having seen anyone else do it. So it's fair to say that I was more than a little excited at the thought of finally having that experience. Celine and I went to the gathering, hung out, and got to know people. I was probably asking every 20 minutes, are we going to do ritual tonight? Hey, are we going to do ritual? And everybody was like, yeah, later. So later came, and what happened was everyone got tired and decided to go to bed. I was pretty disappointed. I felt like I had missed out on my one chance, my one opportunity to finally learn. We went back the next morning to have breakfast and say goodbye. A lot of people had packed up already and left, but as luck would have it, there was this one high priest and high priestess there, and they were like, oh, you guys just want to see ritual? Yeah, we can do that for you. So we had an impromptu circle. It was amazing. It was the first time I had ever seen a couple, and by that I mean a magical couple, lead a ritual. The energy dynamic there is way more intense. But the most important thing it gave me was validation. And that's something that only a high priest could have given me. I saw what he was doing in ritual, and it wasn't that different from what I was doing, which means I wasn't doing it wrong. Long story short, I think you need to have other people in your life who you can look up to and try to emulate. Not the gods, not people from books that were written 100 years ago, but real people that are living today in our current world. Society changes over time, the craft changes over time, so it's important that we measure ourselves by each other and in the present. If you don't have access to at least one person around you that you feel like you could look up to or try to emulate, I feel like you need to make a significant effort to seek out and find that person. What are your comments on online rare oath-bound events? I don't have a lot of comments, especially if it's an oath-bound event. Distance ritual is definitely possible. We're beginning to implement some of this in our own coven, but it comes with its own unique set of challenges. I think every group has to decide for themselves to what degree remote interaction is acceptable. I'm actually really curious about Gardnerian Wicca and would love to learn more. Great. This question came from a Facebook group, so I think you're in the right place. Hang out in the group, read what people say, and ask some questions yourself. But the best place to learn about a Gardnerian coven is with a Gardnerian coven. So if you have a genuine interest, take a look, see what groups might be near you, see if anybody's doing a public ritual or open class. You can go meet some people and you just might click. Do you have any proposals on how to educate candidates to the point that they can be accurately evaluated? I was once an eager seeker who would have joined any coven that came my way. There are some books out there today that can help educate people as to what covens are like, as well as point out some red flags for spiritual groups. If someone contacts us and isn't totally sure what they want, we might ask them to do some reading and then reach out to us again in the future. The bottom line is this. If anyone in any sort of spiritual group asks you to do something that you're truly uncomfortable with, perhaps you need to reevaluate whether or not that group is for you. Now, this is one way that the internet and Facebook groups could be really advantageous for seekers. You could make a post, for example, asking, is it normal for a Gardnerian coven to charge for classes? And someone can respond and tell you, no, this is definitely not normal. This is a red flag. And then based on your location, perhaps they can recommend a legitimate group to you. And as much as there are red flags that seekers have to watch out for, there are also red flags that covens have to look out for too. For instance, if somebody is out there looking to obtain an initiation to add validity to products or services they're selling, then that needs to be addressed. Both parties, the coven and the seeker, need to be comfortable with each other. All right, I hope you enjoyed my answers to some of these questions. I have no idea how long I've been talking for. It has felt like a very long video, but we'll see after I do the editing. A big M3 thank you to anyone who submitted a question. I couldn't have done this video without you. Please remember to like and subscribe here on YouTube. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Aerik Arkadian. And if you'd like to help support me making new content, you can check out my Patreon page at Aerik Arkadian. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.